Hi everyone, it's great to be here. So I'm Camilla Buchanan, I'm a policy advisor at the Design Council, and it's been absolutely fascinating already, actually, the time that I've had up in Lancaster, and not least to mention we've got some beautiful weather today, so I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the presentations. And actually I think that events like ServDes are really, really important forum for sharing different research that is going on, but also sharing insights between research and practice. And I think that's partly because so much of the research is rooted in practice, but many of the areas where design is being deemed relevant are emerging, and we do see a real lack of impact, evidence of impact, so particularly in some of the work that we do in the public sector, for example. So I think those synergies between the two ways of working in this field are really, really important, and that's why it's really great to be here. So we're really a learning through doing organisation, and so many of the approaches that we have and the way in which we work has really evolved through insights from our delivery. And given the breadth of work represented here, what I really wanted to do was use this as an opportunity to give you an indication of the range of areas that we're working. And then I particularly want to draw out two emerging areas of our work, one from the business side and the other from the public sector. And then just to finish up with some provocations, really, some gaps about where we think there's potential to do more research or where there are certain gaps in our knowledge. So to briefly orientate you, the Design Council was set up in 1944, which means we are 70 this year. And really at that time, we were set up by the UK Department for Business, and really at that time we were about promoting British industrial design as an important sector to the UK economy. In 2011, we merged with an organisation called CABE, the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment. So today we represent quite a wide spectrum of design work. We work in quite wide contexts, right through from spatial planning, so quite a kind of tangible, be it large scale area, but also to much less tangible spaces like policy development, which is something I'm very excited about and actually my area of focus at the moment at the Design Council. So we're an enterprising charity. We still get a core grant from the Department for Business, but we also generate income through both our services and programmes and other work. And we have a mission statement which is championing great design to improve lives. And really what we mean by that is taking design as an approach, as a process to a wider set of problems in business and society. And we've probably been working in that way since about the mid to late 90s. And we're often working with people who are hitherto completely unaware of design as a process and as a way of creating change. So often people in places where this is fairly new. We do that through three main areas of delivery. So our audiences are quite diffuse. I mean, we work with businesses both large and small. We work with central government, we work with local government, we work with researchers, of course, and also the design community. And we have three key program areas. So the first of these is our design challenges work, and these are big open innovation competitions, big large-scale competitions around major knotty societal issues. So we've done work, for example, in accident and emergency, we've worked in youth employment, and we're currently running a project in Southwark and Lambeth in South London, a borough in South London, on early years learning with a trust down there called the Guy's and St Thomas's Trust. A second area of work, which is the bit which is largely subsidised by government, is called our Design Leadership Programme. And this is really a coaching programme to increase design awareness and also the capability to use design in organisations. And we've got three main audience groups for that work. So we work with small businesses, they're typically manufacturing businesses. We work with public bodies, and we also work with science and tech teams in universities, so those responsible for technology transfer. And then a final area of work is advisory services to the built environment. So that's through our CABE team, and we very often work with developers or local authorities in that area. I wanted to show you this because we're quite proud of it. So our new website was launched in February, and this is actually an image from the design challenge I mentioned on early years learning. It's called the Knee High Challenge, but the full range of our work is on there. So please do take a look. So whilst we have quite diffuse audiences and client groups, it's really this concept of design as a process which unites everything that we do. And we do have certain core principles which sit under that. And I just wanted to draw your attention to them because really that's the thing that unifies our work right across the organisation. So they are people first, always designing from the perspectives of the people that we are intending to design for, that service, system, product is intended for. So that's absolutely at the centre of everything that we do. Prototyping, so testing early, cheaply, and learning from this, and always learning as we go along, so learning iteratively. And then finally, clear visual communications. And I was actually just reflecting that I think that's one of the things that I've learned the most from working at the Design Council, is actually just communicating very, very clearly in a way that is accessible and relevant to the people that we're trying to communicate to. And this is a very well-versed group, so I don't want to go into the nuts and bolts of our tools and methods, but sitting under these principles, we have a whole raft of ways of working which we have developed really over about the period of the last 10 years. And many of them are extracted from product design, others from ethnography. And I think lots of people here will probably be familiar with the way in which we and others describe the design process. So this is the double diamond, and representing really the way in which we work, which is very, very much about divergent thinking at the beginning before refining and selecting ideas to shape up into design briefs. So I just want to move on to talking to sharing some examples of our work in two really broad areas. One, the business side, and the other, the public sector. The examples I'm going to use are mostly from our design leadership programme. So that's the coaching and training work that we do with organisations. And I've selected these ones because arguably that's the closest of our work to service design. But hopefully what this will show is that this is much more than designing an interface with the public. And that's actually true for so much of the work represented in this room. So there are, as I said, three main audiences for this. Pre-startup, science and tech, and that's UK universities, small, typically manufacturing businesses, and the public sector. So Naylor Industries is very, very typical of the type of business that we might work with through the business programme. And over the years, we've worked with about 2,000 businesses over a period of about 10 years, and 1,000 of those we've coached intensively. And actually that link between design as a driver of business competitiveness has always been at the heart of our work. And back in the 50s, it was about getting people spending by promoting design, about kind of getting Britain spending. And in about the mid-90s, it became much more about embedding design principles and methods in organisations where typically that are non-design organisations, so typically they're not really aware of this as an approach before we go in and work with them. And so, as I said, something like Naylor Industries is very, very typical of the type of organisation that we might work with. It's a family-run business up in Barnsley, so fourth generation, and they develop very hard-wearing clay for use in agriculture. And the project that we did with them was actually quite an early one, so it was back in 2005-06, and they were struggling with competition from newer materials and looking for new market applications for this really hard-wearing clay. And one of the things that working with us showed was that they were having all of these ideas all over the business, but no particularly coherent approach to either brand management or product development. So one of the things that we helped them do was identify this new brand called Yorkshire Flower Pots and prioritise that. So it was an idea that they already had, but amongst this sea of other information, they weren't necessarily prioritising it and seeing the potential of it. And I think it was really interesting, both in terms of what it did to the business. They're now £30 million a year turnover, and actually the sales of this specific line changed from £500,000 to £6 million in 3 years. So there was a massive, massive impact, both economically, but also in terms of the wider business. But I think there is a very interesting lesson from this work too about the culture change, so that today half of the products that the business make are not products that they were making 5 years ago, which is really, really interesting in terms of both economic impact, but also the way in which an organisation was working. And I love this slide. This is Edward Naylor, who he owns the business. It's his family, and it's often the the greatest cynics that become the biggest evangelists, and he really is a massive convert to design. And what he's saying here is that when he started working with us, it was really the perception of design as form giving and its aesthetic role that was how he understood it, and that now it's something which runs right across the business. And that's really what we're trying to do in this work. We're trying to work with people for a period of time so that they then actually are able to use these approaches in their way of working. I want to make quick reference to another area of work that we have through the business programme. So I mentioned our work with technology transfer offices in UK universities, and we take quite a similar approach with these, but the needs are quite different. So we've been working since about 2010 with UK universities, and we work with about 30 to date, and some of our alumni are from Nottingham, Oxford, so some of the really big universities in this country. And often the needs of this group are quite different to businesses, because they will have a very sophisticated and often quite clear technology or research idea, and it's really exploring the market applications of that and communicating something really quite complex in a way that potentially investors or audiences are going to understand and find useful. So this project was with Nottingham University, and they developed technology to measure, non-invasive technology to measure heart and breathing rates, but the market applications of it that they had seen were about 10 years out, and we helped them to think about how it could be embedded into baby monitors. And I think, again, there were two really interesting outcomes from this project. On the one hand, we really helped them with the communications of what they knew so well anyway, but just having that external and particularly that design perspective helped them to communicate to investors in a way that they hadn't necessarily been able to before. But I think the other thing that was really interesting from this project was the idea of a re-energised and refocused team. So suddenly the team could see that all of this research that they were doing did actually have potential for application, which was really, really important to them in terms of their morale, their spirit, their desire to carry on with seeking applications for the work that they were doing. I want to finish up on the business side with reference to a much newer area of work that we're running at the moment. So for the past year, we've been working with a major UK aerospace company, and we're piloting a programme with businesses in their supply chain. And the principle here is really that competition, of course, doesn't just happen between business to business. It also happens between entire supply chains. So it's in the interests of a prime customer or a supply chain business to create a sustainable supply chain. And so as I say, this is a pilot, and we've worked with two businesses in a supply chain that comprises 650. So you can see that it's the tip of the iceberg. But what we're finding is that the client is really seeing this as a massive shift from supply chain management, so actually just procuring things from the supply chain, to actually collaborating with businesses in the supply chain. And our approach, which is fairly structured, and because we've developed it over quite a long period of time, is really providing them a lens through which to do that. And it's very interesting to hear their perception of how it's shifted the relationship that they have with the businesses that comprise their supply chain, but are so vital to them on issues such as design compliance, the ability of those businesses to take on new technologies, for example. So I want to move on to some of the work that we've been doing in the public sector, and then finish up with some of the emerging areas from that work, which I'm particularly interested in. About 5 or 6 years ago, we began working with public bodies, and really that was a process of extracting some of the work that we've been doing with businesses and some of the lessons that we'd learned from the work with businesses and applying them to the public sector. So to date, we've worked with about 30 public bodies in the UK, typically local authorities, on frontline service challenges. And we are one of a whole raft of organisations. I know that you heard from FutureGov a couple of days ago. I wish I could have heard that presentation. But we are one of a number of organisations that have been working in this way. And so actually a fair amount of design work has taken place, particularly in local authorities and particularly on frontline services in the UK. And this is an example from a fairly early project that we did with Lewisham Borough Council, which is down in South London, for those of you who aren't familiar with the UK. And we were asked to come in and really redesign the experience of a homelessness service. And some of the lasting legacy from that were changes to the physical environment, but also changes to the communications environment. And the experience of the frontline staff was that they were having people come in the door incredibly, acutely stressed and incredibly critical situation. It's really about, am I going to get a house or not? And often very simple things were a massive barrier for them to understand the process through which they were going to go through. So some of the things that we did were create very visual forms which were much more helpful for those, for example, whose first language wasn't English. And again, there was a real sense from the staff of a much greater agency of being involved in reshaping the service that they were delivering daily and finding acutely stressful to deliver. But Lewisham's a really interesting example because that design approach has actually rippled out through the entire organisation, and it's quite interesting to see that their CEO, who's called Barry Quirk, was awarded a design award by an organisation called the RSA back in November. So suddenly you have this situation where people in government are getting awards for design work. And I love this quote, which is from someone who we worked with at Lewisham, and I think she's very articulately showing how her knowledge evolved and really changed. And so she started out by really thinking of design as styling as something which was actually not really relevant or accessible to people in the public sector, and perhaps as sort of that aesthetic luxury or add-on. And it became very much more about her seeing it as a process and a way of them actually thinking through some of the issues and challenges that they face on a daily basis. I just want to finish up on the public sector side by giving reference to some of the newer work that's taking place, and it's something that, with my background in policy, I'm particularly excited about. So really in the last couple of years we've seen a real interest from central government in our methods and approaches, and the major driver for this is something called the Civil Service Reform Plan, and really that is a wide plan to reshape Whitehall, essentially, but it does have a directive to introduce new methods into policy development in the UK. And I think that has been a big driver for increased interest from central government, but there are other initiatives going on in the UK at the moment which I think are also really amplifying interest and also the visibility of design in central government. So this is a slide from something called the Government Digital Service, which I'm sure many people in this room are familiar with, but that's an initiative right from the heart of central government, really, which has been responsible for redesigning the entire web interface for central government departments with the public, and it's a very tech and design-led project right at the heart of the UK central government. So since about 2013, we have been coaching central government civil servants, and we've worked with about 400 people within the policy profession to date. And these are very often senior level policymakers, senior level civil servants. We've been doing typically training, so half-day workshops, introducing them to design methods and creating awareness of the type of work that we've done and extracting a lot of the lessons from the work that we've done in local government. And this has largely been through an organisation called Civil Service Learning, and very often as a bolt-on to policy days or training weeks. I think I've been given my time. I'll wrap it up. But one of the things that we have seen is that the pathways from training to delivery aren't necessarily there at the moment. And so I just want to, on the public sector side, mention some work that we are actually doing in policy development. It's a project that is fairly new and it's currently underway, but it's showing some really, really early and interesting insights for where this work is useful to much more structural challenges in government. So we're currently working with a policy team on a project which is around both a change in legislation, but also some of the things that wrap around the legislation. So the web interface, for example, the forms, and really the interface with both the public, but the people that the legislation impacts who aren't necessarily members of the public. And the reason that we started this work was a very senior person came to one of the training sessions that we'd done, and she heard facilitation of complex stakeholder groups, and the legislation involves a group of very passionate and diverse stakeholders, and it is showing from us some really early insights about where design can be valuable in a much more structural context in government. So one of the things that it's enabled us to do is create a common language by bringing people together in workshops and really creating common language for people from very, very different points of view. it's helped to bring many more human and much richer insights into the policy development process, which has actually resulted in more options and ideas for this change to legislation. And it's also helped us to map out the process through which a member of the public or someone else might engage with this legislation, which is the first time that the department had actually ever done that. And I think it's quite important to stress that in this case, we're not replacing a public consultation system or policy development system. We're actually augmenting it so that the team are now in a position almost uniquely where before they go out to public consultation, they have already engaged with their stakeholder groups. And for them, that's been really valuable. I focus mostly on the delivery work that we do, but we also do a whole range of advocacy and research and policy work, which is where I sit in the organisation. And I just wanted to highlight 2 recent research reports that we've done. Design for Public Good, which is available outside, so I noticed there are a few copies left, so please do pick one up before you go if you have space in your suitcases. And that's a project that was funded by the European Commission, and it's really to my mind, showing the landscape of where design work is taking place in the public sector in EU countries at the moment. The second report, or actually the first, is Leading Business by Design, and that's a raft of case studies from 12 businesses which show the levels of which they're using design. And again, I think really important and helpful in terms of seeing some of the emerging areas on the business side for this work. I want to mention, as I hope it's really interesting and relevant to this group, the European Design Innovation Platform. So we are leading a consortium of 13 organisations to deliver the EDIP platform, which is really to promote the use of design innovation in both business and the public sector in the EU. It's going to be a web platform and also an accompanying programme of engagement. And the website is going to be live at the end of this month, but you can register interest, and we will be looking for case studies, toolkits, examples from both the UK and wider community. So the website to register interest is www.designplatform.eu, and so we really are hoping to build a community around that, and it would be fantastic to have some of the people here register interest. Just to wrap up, I want to flag some of the emerging areas and the gaps that we're seeing, really based on insights from our research. And I was reflecting with colleagues back at the Design Council about what is coming out of our work and where we perceive there to be gaps. So I've just put together a few questions here. But the first of these is about evidence. There is still a dearth of evidence of value and impact of this work, and actually we really do need to get smarter and better about articulating the value of the work that we're doing and really having the impact and evaluation built right at the start of projects. And that is really challenging in particularly, for example, the public sector, where many of the insights are so rich and important, but they are often qualitative. And we're doing quite a lot of work in that area at the moment. Another interesting question, as work, particularly in government, moves from the service level and perhaps touch points and interfaces with the public up to much more structural projects is a reflection about what are the common design principles. I think there are common principles, but what are the methods that sit alongside them? And actually, it hasn't necessarily been a process of direct translation from the service work we do in terms of methods up to the policy work. We have had to shuffle the parts a bit whilst retaining those core principles. So I think that there's a really interesting area of reflection there. Another one, how do design methods work in conjunction with other approaches, but also the environment in which we're trying to use them? So in a public sector context, how are they sitting alongside things like behavioural insights? And a colleague of mine was here on Wednesday actually doing a workshop on design and behavioural science, but also how they're sitting alongside well-being and issues such as political expediency, public opinion, the types of environment that policymakers and also those in delivery contexts in government are having to navigate all the time. Design is not working in isolation, and we're certainly not working in isolation. Fourth question, as non-designers get more interested in this stuff, what are the spaces, what's the language, what's the ongoing support that's required for them to be able to take lessons from training and translate it into the ways in which they're working? And then finally, what training is needed for designers working in non-design environments? And I know that there are some fantastic courses internationally that are equipping designers to do this, but still we are seeing that you don't necessarily have a very clear pathway into this kind of work when you perhaps come out out of an industrial design degree. And actually, on the one hand, we have people saying, where are the designers? We can't get the designers. And then I meet so many designers who are saying, I'm fascinated by these stranger bits of the sector. How do I get there? And I don't think those pathways are very clear yet. So, to finish up, I've tried to show a range of areas in which we're working, and that really some of the most exciting challenges for us have become much more structural, and they're not about us having a template that we take into a service context, but actually about sticking to our core principles, working with a client and shuffling the parts to an extent depending on the context. And that's particularly been the case with some of the more structural work in government, but also in business. So thanks very much, and I'd love to hear any questions or responses to that rapid take on the Design Council.